Hi, everybody. How's everyone doing? That isn't even moderate enthusiasm. Come on. How's everyone doing? All right. It's like a B-. My name's Aidan Flax-Clark. I'm the director of Life from NYPL, and I am thrilled, even with your B- enthusiasm, I'm thrilled you're all here. We're going to get to B+ by the end of the night, right? See? We're already there. And if you're watching online, thank you as well for being with us. Siddhartha Mukherjee is here tonight. He has just published an updated edition of his seminal Pulitzer Prize winning book, The Emperor of All Maladies. The book is described as a humane biography of cancer from its first documented appearances thousands of years ago through the epic race today to cure, control, and conquer it. And in addition to winning the Pulitzer, the book, among many accolades, was named a New York Times Top 100 Book of the Century, and it also landed on the Time Magazine All-Time 100. So it's, like, pretty good. And believe it or not, 15 years ago, 2 days after the book was published, he was here in this library to talk about it. So we just couldn't be more honored that he's back again 15 years later to talk about this new edition, which has been updated with 4 new chapters that illuminate new developments in cancer detection, prevention, treatment, and understanding. And hopefully you saw it's available for sale over here, and everyone has already purchased many copies. Yes? All right, I don't believe you, but you're going to have more time at the end of the talk. So if you didn't get it on the way in, you'll have a chance to buy it on the way out, and he will be signing copies of the book over here afterward as well. Siddhartha will be speaking with Dhruv Khullar. Dhruv is an associate professor of health policy and economics at Weill Cornell Medical College. He is also a writer for The New Yorker. His full bio, along with Siddhartha's, is available in your printed program, or if you're watching online, it's on the event listing or the YouTube page. You received note cards when you came in. These are for asking questions at the end of the talk. My colleagues will come by during the conversation and pick up your note cards. Please phrase your questions in the form of questions. We really appreciate that. And if you're watching online, you can put your question in the chat and we'll be glad to get it there as well. Live from NYPL is made possible by the continuing generosity of Celeste Bartos, Manaz Ispahani Bartos, and Adam Bartos, and much more importantly, by all of you here and all of you online. So thank you very much for being here. Thank you for your support. And let's please give it up for Dhruv Khullar and Siddhartha Mukherjee.
All right. Well, I was in medical school when The Emperor of All Maladies came out, and I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that the book changed my life. It is a book that is staggering in its scope and ambition, and as a medical student, I thought, wow, it's possible for a book to be like that. It's possible for a career to be like that you could be a doctor who sees patients and a writer who communicates to the public with such nuance and narrative and beauty. So I want to just start by saying this is a real treat. Thank you, for coming to do this with me. Maybe we can start at the beginning of the new version, and I'll have you read a little bit of the opening to the 15th anniversary edition.
Great. Well, thank you for having me, Dhruv. And we can begin at the beginning, as it were. It begins with what is now called Part 7. Now, the amazing thing about it is that in adding so many more chapters, maybe paper has become thinner. Because I had imagined that by this time, that having added 4 or 5 major new chapters, that this book would become like something that you could kill someone with. But it isn't. So I think the Chinese are doing something right. I'm not supposed to say that. Anyway, it's called The Emperor's New Journey, 2010 to 2025 and beyond. And it begins with a poem which I think is an important poem, which sort of, in some ways, colors the whole book. This is, of course, from Emily Dickinson. I measure every grief I meet with narrow, probing eyes. I wonder if it weighs like mine or has an easier size. I wonder if they bore it long or did it just begin. I could not tell the date of mine. It feels so old a pain. And so this is the introduction to the new edition, and I suppose it answers the question, which is the first question, which is why write a book again once it's been written. And again, to quote, I wonder if they bore it long or did it just begin. So this is called The Emperor's New Journey. That's the 7th part and therefore the introduction to the new book. In the summer of 2008, I walked into the office of a New York editor with a large brown paper bag. That's Nan Graham. Say hello, Nan. In it were 600 pages of my book, The Emperor of All Maladies. My mother had looked at the brick-thick, black-bound pages as I left my house and called it the telephone directory of hell. I sat in the editor's waiting room high above 6th Avenue, looking outside. It was one of those magical New York afternoons when the balminess of the air becomes intoxicating, and crowds had gathered on the streets. But I was a trainee in oncology in Boston, and all I could see was a landscape of future grief and anxiety. The woman laughing breezily by the bakery might be diagnosed with cancer. Ovarian, ? Breast, ? In a few years. I imagined the man smoking a cigarette with evident pleasure by the fountain in a hospital gown as he went for a lung CT scan. The lenses with which I saw the world had forever been changed. In the 15 years since the publication of The Emperor of All Maladies, the collective lenses through which we see cancer have also forever been changed. New horizons have emerged in the early detection of cancer, while innovations in treatment built on extraordinary work in immunology and cell therapy have widened the tantalizing world of personalized medicine. Some cancers considered untreatable only a decade ago have been eradicated in individual patients, and yet the disease continues to surprise and frustrate us. There is, of course, no one cancer, and there will be no one cure. And with each apparent step forward, the vast tangle of cancer's complexity comes more vividly into view. The complete eradication of cancer through prevention remains a fantasy. We hunt for new classes of carcinogens, yet the definition of carcinogens does not on its own explain why a tumor will develop in one person and not another. Technologies purporting the early detection of cancer sprout daily, but are yet to demonstrate that patients diagnosed with these technologies will have improved outcomes. And even with new therapies, many patients with cancer remain and become resistant to treatment. Meanwhile, the cost of cancer treatment skyrockets, presenting an insurmountable barrier to the equitable distribution of medical care. Through all this, cancer remains a meme for everything that is malignant in our society and culture. When I began writing The Emperor of All Maladies, I had in mind a kind of journal that would allow me to make sense of the world of cancer. The world of cancer that I had experienced as a young physician in medical oncology. As I wrote, the book became something far greater than I first imagined. It became a biography that aimed to illuminate humanity's engagement with this terrifying and beguiling ailment. I would tell the story through the intersection of lives and ideas, scientific theory and medical practice, culture and belief, traced through the sweep of history, as well as within the intimacy of a single patient's diagnosis and treatment. And so, in a sense, the chapters that follow constitute an entirely new emperor. In a decade and a half, there has been so much more learning that I realized that only a new book could capture the horizons ahead. The new chapters are organized simply along the 3 pillars of our strategy against cancer: prevention, screening, and treatment, capped with a chapter on a new vision for the future. New vistas have opened yet more new vistas for exploration, science, and medicine, and for the evolving cultural metaphors that cancer still evokes. Prevention, cancer, treatment, and the future. I welcome you to a new book.
Thank you for that. So I want to start by rewinding back even further than the start of the new book, which is, how did the idea first come to you? You know, when did it first come to you? Why did it come to you? Why frame this book as a biography? You know, not as a scientist, not a biography of a place, but of a disease. Take us back to, I don't know, 2005, 2008, whenever you started thinking about this book.
Well, the new book began because no such book existed. And it was really my own attempt to try to understand the disease. The book begins with a very simple anecdote of a patient who comes to me and says, why am I being treated this way, in this manner, through this protocol? And I began to realize that this is not a question of one person. This is a very universal question, a question that we're all trying to understand. How did we get here? How did cancer become what it is today? And what will happen in the future? And the idea of writing the book began that way. And then I titled my books very late in the process of titling books. When I looked back and started reading what was then a journal, I realized that there was a biographical quality to it. Now, people often say, well, aren't you making, isn't this an anthropomorphic variant of but literary biographies have existed of characters that are much more fictional than the role cancer occupies in our lives. And therefore, this is how the book began. The book began because I was interested in very fundamental questions. Where are we going? How do we get here? What happens next? But I was also interested in the cultural metaphors. Sontag's Illnesses metaphor was a very influential book for me, and plays a very large role in the first book. The writing of Oliver Sacks, the writing of Atul Gawande, and so many others had played a very influential role in my life. And yet, I felt as if I was trying to write something that was something that was more simultaneously more intimate, but had the sweep of history in it. I was not trying to write an Oliver Sacksian case history. I was not trying to write. There were so many knots. I was not trying to write a Sontagian cri de coeur about what illness meant. I was trying to write none of them, but all of them. And I was trying to focus on one disease, the one that is, in some ways, defines contemporary life. And so that's how the book came about.
Were you surprised by the tremendous
Sorry, go ahead.
reception that the book received? I mean, a lot of doctors write books. Not all of them win the Pulitzer Prize and become a Ken Burns documentary. I read somewhere that you called your parents and told them you won the Pulitzer, and they said, oh, cool, what's that? And so how did your life change after the book received the type of reception that it did?
Well, my life changed forever. I mean, once if you're fortunate to get critical acclaim of this, and the book became a kind of, again, like cancer, a kind of meme that I hadn't expected. Routinely, I see variations of words and phrases from the book lifted appropriately acknowledged, lifted. And so my life changed forever. I became, in some ways, there were things about it that I didn't want to become. I didn't want to become sort of the cancer expert of the world. I wanted to retain the curiosity and the intimacy that it means to be a physician and a patient.
But did you always see yourself as kind of a literary doctor? Like, would this have been your path regardless of the success of the book, or would you have gone in a different direction, become more of a just publishing in academic journals, let's say, or I know you're now an entrepreneur as well, but I'm just trying to get a sense of what does Sid Mukherjee look like today, if not for the success of this book?
Well, obviously, it's very different. I look like a different person. I am a different person. My public life is different. The way I intercept the world is different. So yes, the book swerved my life. In a way, a kind of a river in spate swerves your life. And the book swerved my life in of course, in some very positive ways, but also, as I said, some ways that were unexpected and not even desirable. Just to give you one example, ultimately I had to hide my email because my inbox, even today.
I'm sorry about that. There was only 25 emails I sent you that day.
But it's not the complimentary emails. The ones that bring real grief are the ones that are. My son has medulloblastoma. I know you've never seen me in my life. I know you don't know my son, but if you knew him, if you knew Joe, he's 11 months old. He's a playful character. He loves rhymes. Can you please help? And those break your heart because you cannot, for so many reasons, you cannot. But they break your heart in so many different ways because this was not the person I wanted to become. I didn't want to become the person who can't write back emails because they break your heart. And that's what I became. There is a as you know, there's the beautiful book by John Green, The Fault in Our Stars, has a character in it who writes a book called The Imperial Malady. I'm acknowledged in the book, so it's fine. But that character has the woman, the young protagonist, the young woman goes with cancer, goes to meet this guy who lives in some Holland or someplace, I don't remember. But and he turns out to have lost heart. And in some ways, I still wonder to what extent this book sort of, like a river in full spate, just deviated my life out of what would have been, I would have imagined, a life of a thoughtful, compassionate doctor who is able to answer his emails every day.
Yeah. So part of the answer to this question is contained in the book, so you'll have to buy it if you want the full answer. But let me just preview some of it. So in the last 15 years, since the first edition came out, what has surprised you most about the changes in oncology or healthcare more generally? Like, what are the things that you would not have predicted in 2010, 2011, and what are the things that you maybe did predict?
Well, I think the most illuminating chapters, well, all the 3 chapters contain dramatic new information. But if I was talking, I'll just give you sort of headliners from all the 4 chapters. In cancer prevention, in the question patients or patients' families, loved ones are asking themselves is, why did I get cancer? And And that question is a question that people ask themselves who have not exposed themselves to what we know as classical cancer-causing agents, carcinogens. They're not smokers. They've, drunk their goji berry juice for a full decade and gone to every yoga retreat that they could have gone to. They've been good cancer doobies. And yet, here they are in a blue hospital gown getting a CAT scan for lung cancer. And so the question, which was an embarrassing question for the community, for our community of physicians, was, what are we missing? Are we missing something that is in the universe of carcinogen? Is there dark matter in carcinogenesis that we're missing? And this became a progressively embarrassing question. What I don't write about in the book, but which is real, is that if you really think about it, we had not found a preventable carcinogen a preventable chemical carcinogen of great impact on human communities since the 1970s, and that was cigarette smoke. You could say obesity is maybe one big example, but this was, in some ways, you could say this is a bizarre situation. You're spending hundreds of millions of dollars, and certainly we found many new carcinogens, but none which had the kind of public health impact. So the headline of the first chapter is, we are actually now finding new ones, but they're a form of carcinogen that we had never expected to find. They are truly the dark matter of carcinogenesis. I'll leave you with that thought. The second one, so the second area we talked about is, the second chapter is on early detection and screening. And even today, there was an article in the Times about early detection and screening and how cancer rates are going up, and some say they're going down, some, and the answer is that there is a fundamental inbuilt mathematical reason that early detection and screening has not worked the way we had intended it to work. And to find out, you'll have to read the second chapter. The third has to do with treatment. The big missing piece there was the immune system and the role of immunology and inflammation in cancer. And that leads on to the fourth, which is a new direction in which we can integrate all of this to find a new pathway forward.
So let me push you a little bit. I was when I was reading the end of the book, I was delighted to see my name in the book, and that was a real thrill for me. And then I realized it was mostly just about my prostate, and that was less exciting. So the story is that I had written an article about getting a full body MRI, which are now being kind of aggressively marketed, and the MRI picked up a small lesion in my prostate. Those are graded on a scale from 1 to 5. It was 3, of course, so they have no idea what it was. And it led to additional testing and follow-up MRIs and so on. So I guess my reading the chapter on screening, you could come away with the impression that very little works in cancer screening, even the traditional things that we think might work, like colonoscopies and mammograms. And now there are these new modalities, like full-body MRIs or liquid biopsies. So maybe just spend a moment talking about the difficulty of cancer screening, why it is the case that even today medicine has so little to offer people who want to be proactive about getting screened, and what you make of these newer modalities that are now on the horizon.
Yeah, so the problem with cancer screening is a mathematical problem. It is not a cancer problem. It is not a biological problem. It's a mathematical problem, and it's a simple mathematical problem. I describe it in the book. There are many mathematical problems, but there's one fundamental one, and the one fundamental one is this is a thought exercise that I'll throw out to you. Imagine, and this is in the book, so you'll read about it in the book. But imagine they're twins. In the book, I call them Hope and Prudence. Who get diagnosed with, or who don't get diagnosed, who get breast cancer at the same moment of time, at the same second as the clock ticks. One of them, Hope, decides that she is going to be very proactive about her health, goes through her scans, and a mammogram finds that she has breast cancer, and they, surgeons operate on it, they give her chemotherapy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and she dies 5 years later after her cancer has been detected. Prudence says, I'm not doing any of this. I'm going to go to Mexico, have wheatgrass juice, and I am not participating in all of this nonsense, scanning, et cetera, et cetera. And she is not diagnosed until her breast cancer becomes either visible or she starts having symptoms. And then that's much later. And she gets diagnosed at that point of time. And then Hope and Prudence are put into the same hospital bed, and they unfortunately die in the same moment of time as the clock ticks. So now ask yourself the question, you use, the word survival comes up, right? So how many years did Hope survive? And the answer is, well, she survived 5 years. She had breast cancer, and then she was detected, treated, et cetera, et cetera. She survives 5 years. How many years did Prudence survive? She survives 1 year, because she gets detected at the 1 year, and then she dies. But of course, that couldn't be true, because both of them acquired their breast cancer at the same moment of time, and they died at the same moment of time. So Hope's screening did nothing to her, really. They both of them had the exact same moment of death. So the only way that you can really judge a screening test, cancer screening test, is by using mortality, not survival. Survival is easy to judge because you can put people on a trial and you can have two control groups and have one group saying, they went through the test and they survived 5 years. The other one didn't go through the test and survived 1 year, so therefore the test works.
Yeah. So I guess that makes sense to me, but what I don't understand, so maybe the mental model a lot of people have is incorrect, and you can correct it if that's the case. But there's a few cells, and they have some mutations, and they develop into a small tumor, and it becomes a stage 1 cancer. And over time, it gets bigger, and it spreads to lymph nodes, and it spreads distantly, and we call that stage 2, 3, 4, right? And the idea is that if you were to screen, you could catch it at stage 1 or stage 2, and you could intervene such that Hope would actually have lived longer than Prudence in this example. And why is that so hard? Why can't we catch it?
And that's the problem. I'll offer some solutions as well. This is not as dire as you're making it out, as one can make it out to be. The mistake people make, and actually it's interesting, it's a mistake that Halstead made, is this idea that you just said. So there's a stage 1 cancer, it then spreads to the lymph nodes, it then moves into the next organ, and then moves. That is not the biology of cancer. The biology of cancer is that some stage 1 tumors begin and they immediately metastasize, or they immediately have thrown out metastasis. Halstead called this the centrifugal theory, as you remember, and this is the basis for years and years of radical surgery. He thought the more you cut away, you'll cut away, this centrifugally spreading, like an ink blot spreading thing. You cut away the edges of the ink blot, you've gotten rid of the tumor. That's not how cancer works, and it's very hard to explain that to patients. The biology of the tumor, its genetics, its relationship with its environment, its relationship with the rest of your body, is what determines that the stage 1 tumor, the quote-unquote stage 1 tumor that you've detected by early detection, may have already spread way outside a woman's breast if you're doing mammography, or colon if you're doing colonoscopy. Now, that's not completely true. There is a systematic spread, but it's unpredictable. So therefore, the number of people where you can find that systematic spread and control it, it really depends on the biology of the tumor. And it turns out that cervical cancer is a good example. Cervical cancer tends to spread in this centrifugal way. That's why pap smears work, and that's why you can cut it out. Colonoscopies work because you can detect a precancerous lesion before it has started spreading into other places. Other tumors, you can't do that. So you could say, well, oh my God, why go through all this trouble? Well, there's a way out of this, and it's an important way. And we're beginning to explore it, and I think we will ultimately succeed. And it was taught to us by a 17th century mathematician. I keep saying screening is a mathematical problem. And this was a very unusual 17th century mathematician named Thomas Bayes. And he wrote 3 papers, of which one paper may be the most important paper in statistics and may even be the most important paper in medicine. And Bayes made a very simple argument. Bayes said, look, if you look for a needle in a haystack, you'll find mostly hay and not very many needles. If you put more needles in the haystack, you'll start to find needles. If you put even further needles in the haystack, you'll ultimately find needles more often. Now,
I feel like I could have come up with that.
I know, but it's astonishing that one can come up with that. He actually came up with an actual theorem that has to do with mathematics, and you can predict exactly what the number is. Anyway, but the bottom line, which is interesting and very important, is that with the tools of risk assessment, and especially with genetics, you can do a Bayesian trial. And a Bayesian trial is very different from a normal trial. A Bayesian trial is you move the prior probability of someone being detected and having a true positive cancer, a cancer that's lethal, should be caught early. You move it now towards a much more positive direction. Positive in the sense that you find more needles rather than more hay. And you can now do that with breast cancer. So that's why we screen people with BRCA1 mutations. And we find cancers in those patients. And I suspect that the trials are ongoing, but I suspect those are life-saving decisions. So screening the entire population, in a 20-year-old, or in Dhruv Khullar, a grade 3 or scale 3 detected blip in an MRI is unlikely to be cancer. In a 70-year-old person whose father died of prostate cancer and whose uncle also had another genetically related cancer, the chances that that same lesion is cancer is very, very likely to be true. So you have to have a Bayesian approach. And in fact, I would say a Bayesian approach is an approach to life. It's a way of living your life. Yeah. It's a way of assessing risk.
So when the 30th edition of Emperor is released in 2040, what will we be talking about? What will the next 15 years have brought us that when I get to interview you again at that time, we'll be going through then? How will cancer has changed?
Well, I think that the role of we talked a little bit about this. The role of we for so long, the theory of cancer was dominated by cancer as a series of malignant cells in a vacuum, that we forgot that these cells actually interact with their environment. They live in an immune environment. They bring out blood vessels from the body. They live in an environment which is crucial to their growth, and that's why some tumors never grow while others grow. So we'll be talking about a kind of a more holistic view of what cancer is as a disease, of that physiology, and hopefully we'll be talking about medicines that either prevent, treat, or detect based on that physiology. I think that's what we'll be talking about, and we'll be talking about it. I don't think we just metaphorically, although the metaphors are important. We'll be talking about it in terms of actual medicines, some of which are already existing in the world, that really address this immunological aspect, the microenvironmental aspect, the metabolic aspects of cancer, things that we knew about but sort of ignored.
Tell us about, not a lot of people who are doctors and academics and successful writers end up becoming entrepreneurs as well and starting businesses. What is the work that you're doing trying to find new medicines using artificial intelligence, and how does that play into what we're talking about now?
Well, so as you know, I've been very involved in finding new medicines. This is not my first time that I've gone out of the clinic into finding new medicines. We were the first group actually ever to use CRISPR for cancer treatment. So when AI came along, I began to really think about, dream about, or imagine a mechanism of finding new medicines for cancer using AI. I'm not talking about AI to look at human data across populations, stuff that maybe people in your group do, or maybe you do yourself, which is also a very good use of the tool. What we do at Manus, which is a company I co-founded with Reid Hoffman and Ujjwal Singh, what we try to do at Manus is to reimagine the molecular world. So just to take one step back, cancers are driven, of course, by the growth of a cancer is driven by a mutated gene, which is driving the growth, altering the metabolism, changing the way cancers are behaving. A cell is behaving. It's no longer a normal cell, it's a malignant cell. What we do at Manus is make you close your eyes for a second and think about these mutant genes, these driving proliferators. And what we do at Manus basically is we use AI in many ways, but one way is to take this mutant protein, the one that's driving the growth, and break it up, as it were, into its atomic components. So now you've got this, you can imagine this room as the mutant protein, and we're trying to block it. We're going to put some huge balloon, as it were, to block this room, but it has to have a particular shape and a particular size. And what we do is we try to reimagine this room at an atomic scale, ascribing every dot. Imagine now this room pixelated and devolved into its properties. So no longer do we care about whether there is an arch there or not, but rather we care about the properties of that arch. And we distill, we make the machine learn the properties so that it can then find mechanisms to find new medicines. So we're using AI in a very particular way. We call it, we've had various names for it, but it's the way I like to describe it is it's a molecular oracle. We're trying to create a molecular oracle and then ask the molecular oracle questions that you would ask an oracle, which is, now that you've distilled the properties and learned the properties, that's what the AI piece is, we've learned the properties of something, tell me, in an oracular way, tell me that how you're going to create a medicine against it. And the medicines that we're hoping to get, we're actually now finding, whether they work or not in humans is a long ways away, but the kinds of chemicals that we're hoping to find are chemical matter that's never been discovered before, is new chemical matter. Because the old chemical matter that we've discovered against cancer, works in small instances, but doesn't work often enough.
So someone who's been working to develop new medicines before the advent of these new AI tools, how big of a step change advance is it? I mean, should we expect in 5, 10, 15 years that we have many, many more oncology drugs? Or is it the case that it's not quite like that you still have these bottlenecks of human biology being complex and clinical trials and so on? So, how do you square that with what we've experienced in the past to the future?
Well, so my general impression is that that AI will be an enormous accelerant. It has generally been, again, remember, we're not creating chatbots. We're working in a different model of AI. We're working with a foundation model of AI. We're creating an oracle. Now, oracles in AI, like all oracles, depend on data. You have to train them. They have to learn. And one of the bottlenecks is data in this space. Now, thankfully, about 15 to 20 years ago, a group of scientists led by a woman in England made it compulsory that if you solve the structure of a protein, if you figured out, as I said, in some ways, again, to use this analogy, the structure of this room, your paper could only be published if you deposited that structure in a public database. And think about that, just that advance. And so, and all the journals agreed that that would be the case. So there is a massive public database where enormous amounts of protein structure is stored. And so what we do is, one of our jobs is to train the oracle to learn from that database. And the real question is there enough, even with that massive public database, is there enough data? I suspect there is, but I can't tell for sure. We'll know soon, actually. We'll know soon, at least for this atomic model, we'll know whether this is going to be a work in progress or not.
So I know you're not training chatbots, you're training an oracle, but how far are we from a chatbot writing The Emperor of All Maladies?
Oh, right.
Like, is that conceivable in 5 or 10 years, the job of, fantastic nonfiction writers, actually chatbots could do that reasonably well? So
the other day I did an experiment in which I took, I said, write about something or the other, I don't remember what I was saying, in the style of Siddhartha Mukherjee. And I was horrified.
Because it was so good or so bad?
It was terrible. It was terrible. And I was like, oh my God, if I ever even come close to writing like this, I mean, I must sound like some crazy person on the page. I think I'm safe for now. But I'm not sure. Maybe they'll figure out some clever algorithm. But it was so horrifyingly bad that I felt kind of simultaneously relieved and a little embarrassed.
Sid GPT. I think I have one more question. I think we are going to move on to audience questions. So if you have any and you want to jot them down and pass them along.
We're going to read the last few pages.
Read one more at the end of the book here.
So this is the last 2 pages of the book. I read the first 2 pages of the new book, and then now the last 2 pages. So the first book, many of you remember, ended with my patient Germaine. I think of my patient Germaine often. I remember her sitting with such perfect poise on the evening before she died. I recall her grace and dignity and the enormity of her courage. I think of her will and wit and imagination, and I also think of her sly humor. I know you're writing a journal about your fellowship. I want to say good luck, she told me, and then she winked. This voluminous book was once no more than an untidy sheaf of notes that I carried, and she had once seen the papers fall out of my backpack. Her voice was soft and flecked with infinite kindness, even as she strained to breathe. I felt moved to tears. Here was a woman submerged in pain and fear, drenched in grief, and yet she had found time to think about the scribblings of a lowly fellow in scrubs, leaning over her with a stethoscope. A group of nurses entered the room to wheel the bed next to her away. The bed was folded and moved to the corridor outside. The patient had passed. Whatever you write, she said, make me look fabulous. Fabulous, okay? I don't have much time. There was momentary silence in the room, then the soft screech of a bed being wheeled away. What is time? A student of a Zen monk asked his master month after month. There was no reply, just silence. A few months later, the monk replied irritably, time is a head of cabbage. There are many variations of this koan, but the point perhaps is that time is inscrutable. It lies beyond human comprehension, and asking questions about time doesn't make it more understandable. The question is absurd, and so is its answer. The time I spent with Germaine was one evening, Or was it a few months? Or is it a lifetime? Time was a hospital bed that would be folded and stowed away in some corner. Perhaps it was an unforgettable evening in a room spent talking about a farm in her hometown in Alabama. Or perhaps a lifetime thinking about a patient that I still cannot forget with a shape-shifting, inscrutable illness that I'm still trying to understand. Time is a head of cabbage. I've spent my life in search of comprehension, but it still eludes me. But at least in that searching, I discovered a cosmos of realities. A few months after Emperor was published, I received a handwritten letter. It was from Germain's brother. Even though I changed her name and disguised her identity, he had recognized her in my book. She would have loved, admired, and understood your book, he wrote. Understood. A strange word. A word that signals a desire to know, not just about patients, scientists, and doctors, but about history, about the birth and growth and future of a discipline. That evening, somehow, Germain had intuited that Emperor would be much more than a personal journal. She understood what I wanted to understand. This was the best praise I've ever received about this book. Thank you.
Now you know why AI can't emulate, said Mukherjee. We have a couple questions here, and I'm guessing that people are more accustomed to typing than writing longhand now because it's very difficult to parse this. But can you talk about how you write? What is your daily process and what tools do you use?
So I write in a very bizarre way. It's been written about humorously. I write in bed. Almost exclusively. I find it very comforting, and when I had a new office, I put a bed in my office. I suspect that that would not be allowed today, but then I quickly removed it. But how do I write? I write in small bursts. I write when I have a thought. I was just reading this piece on Oliver Sacks today in the New Yorker, a lovely piece, and he wrote compulsively, and he kept journals after journals, and he wrote, and he would sit in a taxi and write, et cetera, et cetera. I write anti-compulsively, and that means that I think about what I'm going to write, but I don't put a single word down, and I think for a long time, and I keep thinking, and then when I'm hopefully in bed, I can write a full chapter in one go. And I write from beginning to end. I edit, or Nan really helps me edit later, but I really write from the first word to the last word, because in some ways I've been thinking about the process on the way.
What concerns you most about our current Department of Health and Human Services?
Okay. Where does one start? Look, let me talk a little bit about the rhetoric of anti-science, which is probably what's driving. I don't have a personal animosity against any particular person in the Department of Health and Human Services, except that there's one person I'd love to vaccinate. But that said, I think that the concerns are very broad. The concerns are that since the 1950s, the United States has led the world in innovation, and this is innovation in every way: cultural innovation, scientific innovation, technological innovation. This is the one thing we're actually good at. We're terrible at many things, but this is the one thing that has always been the centerpiece of how we have come to change the world. And I think that the anti-science rhetoric is the first, and the anti-culture rhetoric, the anti-reading rhetoric and the fake news rhetoric is one way that we will destroy this amazing lead. So we can talk about particulars and why the HHS has so many problems, but I want to talk about the generalities that we're destroying. We're actively seeing the dismantling of a particular kind of civilization, and the fact that we're actively watching it and doing nothing about it should be deeply embarrassing to us.
Does it change the way you think about communicating? In an anti-elite, anti-expertise, anti-science type of environment, when so many people are skeptical and distrustful of institutions and academics and doctors and so on, how should people in positions of influence and power communicate about these issues?
Well, one thing I think, to some extent, I think doctors and physicians and scientists painted themselves into a corner by becoming experts without humility. It's very easy to dismantle an expert because an expert belongs to a class of the elite, and this is a very even though we're being governed by the elite, ironically, this is a very anti-elitist moment. So I think scientists, physicians, and in their rhetoric, in the use of language, in the use of power, really painted ourselves into a corner because we assumed the role of the language of the elite without assuming the humility that comes with being that elite. You don't need me to tell you that we don't know half a thing about cancer. Otherwise, we'd be treating and curing it with much, much more vigor than we are today. So I think the answer to your question is for ourselves to go back and describe the process by which we come to understanding, which is a messy, complex, often a process which does not involve the kind of scientific heroism, which is so easy to disband. The scientific hero begs the scientific anti-hero. The pro-vaccinator begs the anti-vaccinator, because the anti-vaccinator says, well, wait a second, how did you get to be the boss of me? So the answer to the question of how we communicate during this time is to climb down from the various towers that we occupy and speak to people in the language that we ourselves speak with each other, which is a language that involves not knowing, language that involves humility, but also language that involves an attempt to understand. We actually, to be honest, we actually don't know all the myriad, although it was an incredible savior of human lives, we don't know all the myriad effects that the COVID vaccine has had on human beings. Admit it. It's okay. The world will not, civilization will not crumble if you or I as physicians say that we saved millions of lives, and yet we don't know some fundamental things about immunology in vaccination. It's okay. And it's precisely this kind of oppositional, technocratic, befuddling way of speaking and the lack of communication that's led to this moment. And we have to undo it.
Can cancer ever be fully cured or just managed? Is curing it a pipe dream?
It depends on the kind of cancer. I think we're curing lots, and we are going to cure more. We are curing childhood leukemias at 80%, 90% of cases of childhood leukemias have long-term cures, terrible side effects. We're trying to now work backwards to diminish those side effects. A woman with breast cancer living in 2025 has a completely different outlook on her life than a woman with breast cancer in 2015 or even in 1915. Massive changes. A woman or a man with pancreatic or gallbladder cancer that spread has no change in their life expectancy, basically, give or take, since since dozens of years. So I think we will find a pathway through, and every breakthrough will be a great moment for us as scientists, as human beings, and as patients. But it's very hard to answer, can we ever cure it? Will we ever, it's not going away, that's for sure. We know that random, stochastic, genetic accidents cause cancer, just as carcinogens cause cancer. We know exactly how they cause cancer. They cause mutations, and those happen when cells divide. When they make copies of themselves, you can get a random genetic accident. And that is the genetic accident that leads to cancer, among many other things. So I think the word cancer is not going to be removed from our society in a way that, I don't know, certain other diseases have been really, in a way that smallpox, has really vastly, not completely, but vastly disappeared from our society. So cancer will always be with us. Its metaphors will be with us. Its memes will be with us. But I think we'll change the way we think about it.
We have a couple questions from young people in the audience, it looks like. And I guess putting them together, what advice you have for people who are at the start of their careers, who want to do something in medicine or science or journalism, or who just want to nudge the world in a better direction?
Well, I have a memory of a young journalist and doctor who came to my office 15 years ago, and that was Dhruv. I don't remember. Generally speaking, I give terrible advice. So whatever I'm going to say, you should probably immediately discount it. But the general ideas, the general thing that I say to people is to have at least one big idea. And then once you know you have that big idea, really follow it. It sounds like vague advice, and it probably is. I'm not going to give you a step-by-step, ascendancy into becoming a writer for The New Yorker, but nonetheless, I do think it's important to have one big idea and to execute it, and really to learn how to execute it, to really put yourself to learn how to execute it. I'll give you a quick anecdote that I think is kind of, which I found very moving. I went to a conference in a medical conference, and medical conferences have scientists and they have physicians and physician scientists, etc. And I went to a dinner, and it was someone had passed away, and there was a memorial, and the person stood up and said, so on and so forth, whoever it was, never made a major scientific discovery, but he learned how to cure childhood leukemia. And I thought to myself, that's a very beautiful thought. He never made a big scientific discovery, but maybe he learned how to speak to patients and their families. He learned how to bring that child back year after year, month after month, to be re-examined. He learned how to administer chemotherapy in a way that the child would be able to take it. He maybe learned how to tell a story. Maybe he learned puppetry. I mean, I don't know, but he learned something. He had one big idea, and he learned something. So I don't think there's a, I don't think there's a formulaic way of stating it, but to learn how to do something is very beautiful and very important. And now we have machines to compete with, so we'd better do it quickly.
Well, Sid, thank you for this conversation. Thank you for this book, and thank you all for coming this evening.
Thank you.